A few days ago, I read an article from Jefferson County, Missouri. A woman had shared with a reporter a note that she received on the windshield of her car one day when she was leaving for work. Apparently, her neighbor had been keeping a pretty close eye on the activities of her husband, and her children. And this neighbor had composed a note that talked about how many times she was leaving home during this time of pandemic. The neighbor had observed that her husband was gone all day, assuming that he had an essential job, but she was upset that there were times when she would leave and she would go and drop her child off and then not return for a while. Her neighbor said, obviously, you can't be going to the grocery store every night. I've noticed you're not wearing a uniform or a mask. And then in all caps, the note read, "Stop leaving your home," in order to keep everyone in the neighborhood safe. By the way, it also asked her to do the whole neighborhood a favor and keep her older kids inside because they were too loud when they were outside. That gives you a little insight into what the note felt like reading it for Heather Silchia. Now, what this neighbor didn't know is that Heather was a 911 dispatcher who worked the night shift. In other words, she was leaving every night to go to work in order to protect the neighborhood, in order to give needed instruction to police officers, to firefighters, to EMS workers. They needed to know the relevant information, and they also needed to know if there were any precautions that needed to be taken because of COVID-19. Her neighbor said to keep the neighborhood safe, you need to stay home, but actually her work was what was keeping the neighborhood safe. Now, there are a lot of lessons we can learn from that. The first is that we don't always know what someone else's story is. We can make assumptions about their attitude or about our perceptions of them, but we don't always know the whole story. We need to be careful before we make those judgments. Secondly, maybe we need to find something better to do than watch our neighbors all day and memorize their schedules. But what I want to focus on is the simple response that Heather gave when she was asked about her reaction to the note. She said, if somebody's having a bad day and they're taking it out on you, just be kind. And that's something I have to do every day in my job. If someone's having a bad day and taking it out on you, just be kind. There's a lot of wisdom there. That's pretty good advice for tense times like this, isn't it? Don't you wish that someone could just read the description of love that we find in 1 Corinthians 13 for everyone to hear as we're nervous and tense and maybe saying things or posting things without really thinking about it? In fact, even though we can't read Paul's description of love for the whole world right now, let's just stop and reflect on it ourselves. In 1 Corinthians 13, beginning in verse 4, love is patient. Love is kind and is not jealous. Love does not brag and is not arrogant, does not act unbecomingly, does not seek its own, is not provoked, does not take into account a wrong suffered, does not rejoice in unrighteousness, but rejoices in the truth, bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never fails. But if there are gifts of prophecy, they will be done away. If there are tongues, they will cease. If there is knowledge, it will be done away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part, but when the perfect comes, the partial will be done away. When I was a child, I used to speak like a child, think like a child, reason like a child. When I became a man, I did away with childish things. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then I will know fully, just as I also have been fully known. But now faith, hope, love, abide these three, but the greatest of these is love. A good reminder for us today, and a good challenge for us as we go throughout our day, is to remember this description of love. People are going to be looking at the way Christians respond to everything that's happening around us. And wouldn't it be great if when they looked at us, what they saw was what Paul described here, that they saw love, and love is kind. Let's remember that today.